Tēnā tātou katoa i te tuatahi e tikana ngā mihi ki tō tātou kaihanga i runga rawa koe o te timatanga, koe ono te whakatūtukitanga o ngā mea katoa, nō reire he honore krorea ki aia. Tuarua huriana ngā mihi ki a rātou, ngā tini mate ki rungi a koutou, ki rungi a mātou, ki rungi a tātou katoa, ngā tini mate o te wā, haere hoki atu. Huriana ngā mihi ki a tātou te hunga ora tēnā tātou katoa. Mihi ana ki te haukainga o Ngāti Whātua ki ora kei rātou te mana whenua o te kāinga nei ka tika ngā mihi ki a rātou. Huriana ngā mihi ki a koutou katoa, ki a koe Paula, tika ana te kōrero, whanaunga tahi tāua, nō reira he tino honore tēnei kua tai mai ahau i tēnei wā, nō reira mihi ana ki a koe. Nō reira tātou mā, tēnā koutou, Nisa Bulavanaka, kia rāna, talofa lava, malo lelei, whakalofa lahi atu, and kia ora, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. It is exciting to be here because the theme of your conference is tipping the iceberg, and about the relationship between gambling and mental health issues and other coexisting social and health issues. And, you know, I come here today with a bit of a story around why that's important to me. And I'll share with you my personal story. So as Paula said, I was a bit of a troublemaker at school, but there's a little bit of a backstory to that. My father was one of 18. He's a Māori gentleman from a place in Hauraki, Thames area, Coromandel. And I know there's a lot of visitors from overseas, Sweden, Hong Kong, Australia. Could you just put your hands up if you're not from NZ? Oh yeah, wow, there's a lot. Okay, so my father was an Indigenous Māori man, one of 18, born to two Māori parents, Indigenous parents, one from the north and the other one from the little part of New Zealand called Hauraki. The reason I highlight that is that, you know, being Indigenous at their time was a huge struggle. There's significant cultural, social dislocation and loss, and what accompanied that, an economic loss. What accompanied that was significant decline and I guess a poverty of spirit, poverty of wealth, poverty of hope. And so this is my father's sort of starting point. My mother is in O'Sullivan. She's from a place in the South Island, a middle-class Catholic farming family. Both her mother and father served in the war. One was a hospital ship nurse, and that was my grandmother, and my grandfather fought in the Solomons in the Pacific. Why that's relevant is because while one part of my whakapapa, my genealogy, was struggling to survive, the other part was coming back from the war and getting a war rehabilitation loan and being able to prosper and grow into a comfortable middle-class New Zealand family. The coming together of these incredibly different and contrasting cultures happened because my father was a rebel without a cause cruising around the South Island on a motorbike, and with this young lady off her feet in the small town of Timaru. The clash of these cultures was quite significant, right? So, and also the socio-economic backgrounds that were coming with us. Having 18 mouths to feed and having not enough money and not knowing, you know, if you could feed all of your children on a given day, created significant hardship for this family. And alongside that came all of those other important, impacts of poverty and deprivation, violence, crime, alcoholism, substance abuse. So these, whereas my mother came from this very, comfortable background, my father brought something quite different to this new relationship. And why I mention that is that you know, my mother met my father, and they had myself and my older sister. 3 years after my mother and father were together, I was visiting my father with my mother as a young boy at Mount Eden Prison. So Mount Eden Prison is a remand prison in the middle of Auckland. And he's this Indigenous man who's incarcerated for a whole lot of things. But one of them was bookmaking. And we used to see a crown and anchor, right? Crown and anchor cloth and the cups and the dice and everything. And there's some other things that my father and all his brothers used to do. There's lots of the betting on the horses and anything you could bet on. I used to watch my father capture someone's attention, capture their hope of winning something, and take their money. I saw it. I used to aspire to be as good as he was. He was skilled at it. He would get money out of people who would walk back to the bank. They'd have time to think about what they were doing, but they'd still come back with their week's wages on this belief that they were going to double or triple or quadruple what they had. You know, I used to think, how could anyone be so dumb, right? And, but these people weren't dumb, and these people that are this problem gambling activities were desperate. And there were people that will just prey on them, and then my father was one of them. And so from a family point of view, what would that mean? Well, that would mean some days there was lots of money, and some days there wasn't. And some days, there would be food, and other days there'd be conflict because my mother was trying to rationalise how am I going to feed these children? What was the other problem that came to play here is there was my father was alcoholic, he was violent, and so when things didn't go well, violence would come out, the alcoholism would come out. And an example of this is of the alcoholism and the problems that just permeate through these types of communities is that one evening my mother had just finished work at a takeaway bar, come home, and at 3 o'clock in the morning she came home to see my older sister walking around the lounge pouring beers to all the uncles who had come home from the pub with my father. And she came home with her very good friend who said to her, "You can't live like this." And my mother would have She'd been told she should leave for a long time. She didn't because she couldn't. She couldn't because she was tied to this man, and she couldn't because she had no means to support herself. And but what this lady did was she uplifted this lady, my mother, and her 2 children, and took us into her home, and we lived with her for 12 months. And that there is actually, on reflection, that was emergency housing, right? Emergency housing, but in an informal way. It wasn't women's refuge. It was actually a family friend who cared enough about my mother to take her and her children away. I just finished having coffee with this lady, right, this morning, who's just like this amazing woman in my life. And I said to her, "Do you know you're famous? Do you know that I talk about you everywhere? I talk about how you took my mother at a time when she couldn't, and you gave her the care and compassion that she needed and the support to get on her feet." So this was all happening in the setting of, these cultures coming together. Pākehā, white New Zealand, Māori, Indigenous New Zealand coming together at a time when we were referred to as young kids as half-caste kids, half-caste. The names we'd be called were, could be anything from, slightly insulting to offensive. And so my mother actually moved from this refuge or this emergency housing into a home of her own, and she received a benefit. She received a benefit. She received the compassion of the country at a time of greatest need, and she told me through my life, my job is to give back to the country by creating New Zealanders that will be able to offer a contribution in a meaningful way. And she always told me that. It was a huge responsibility, as well as the privilege, the right to, receive the compassion of the country. So I'm just going to fast forward a bit. There's a whole lot of isms that existed around this, right? So there's racism and sexism. You're racism, you're half caste. Sexism, you're raised by a solo mother. And classism, you're raised by a solo mother who's on a benefit, and you're half caste kid. So those things really shaped my life, and the prejudice that existed then went through my schooling. And yes, I got into a lot of trouble at schooling. The school said, the teacher said I was a poor learner. I would challenge them and say they were poor at teaching. Because I wasn't, you can't go to medical school, Pia Nika, without, and this is a young lady who wants to be a doctor and she's here today to hopefully be inspired. You can't go to medical school if you're a slow learner, really. And you know, it's about, you know, for me, it's about what are the environments we're creating for our, you know, our young people, our families, our most needy, or those with most needs, and how do we make those better or worse? And so I, you know, fast forward, I actually got expelled from 2 colleges. I wasn't a troublemaker. I was like, I was a problem, right? And I got expelled from 2 colleges because they clearly didn't know how to handle such a gifted student. But what I found my feet was in an Indigenous secondary school for Māori boys, and a school called Hātou Pētara. Now, why that's really important is because I walked into that school feeling like someone who was a child of a beneficiary who, you know, solo parent, half-caste kid, and I walked out feeling like someone who had something great to offer, you know, my people and the country. So I've been a doctor for about 17 years, 18 years, and 12 of those years have been in one of the most remote parts of, or one of the highest areas of highest deprivation in the country, beautiful as it is, with lots of challenges. And that's right up the top of the country. Now, why am I here today and speaking about problem gambling and the impact on poverty-related diseases in children, which is what I'm passionate about, is because I've seen it. I've seen it every day, and you know, it makes my job hard, if not impossible. You know, I've got medications and I've got prescriptions that I can have in my pockets, but how am I going to deal with the fact they're going home to a home that's cold, overcrowded, not enough food, and so I am, you know, like, I know that child poverty and poverty in our communities is a deep-seated issue, and there is so much to do to address that, you know, and some would say it will take a long time, generations and decades, but, you know, we have to look at what's the low-hanging fruit, what are the things that we can address today that could make an impact tomorrow, and just mihi kia koe Richard, kōrua ko Gareth, mai te tari, hauora, manatu hauora, and, you know, especially for your mihi, Richard, just to say, he whāngai o Taranaki, kia ora. It's going to take strong political leadership and strong will in the government. And, you know, the ministries are there to affect the direction set by our government. And, you know, I listened with interest on your talk, both of you. And, you know, for me, it's not fast enough. You know, things have to happen faster than, you know, like this. And I know that the ministries are there to follow a process, but we really do need, you know, the country and the leaders of our country to get behind this really important issue of problem gambling and the impact it's having on our communities. And, you know, this should be a time like no other, really, in recent memory, that we should be able to achieve that with, you know, the government we have today and the importance of, say, of children and the impact of poverty on children and the impact of these children in poverty on our future country and society. And so, like, it's, you know, and this is much a massive challenge and call out to government to say, well, you know, address problem gambling and let's not take time, let's do something fast, because, you know, this is driving child poverty and making my job incredibly hard. So I'm going to share with you a story which is, like a really troubling story for me. But I've been a doctor up there for a while, seen a whole lot of things. But one evening I was working in the Keynote hospital, and I was there at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'd just seen a patient who'd had a heart attack, and I live 15 kilometres north, so I usually travel home. But this one I wanted to stay there because I was worried about the possibility of this patient in his 60s getting worse over the next hour or two. So I went and slept in the staff room of the hospital on a really uncomfortable couch. And about half an hour later, a nurse came in, her name's Tracy. Nurse came in really stressed out, really panicky, and she said, you have to come into the resus room, there's a baby who's really critically unwell. So I go into the resus room, and I go into this room confronted by this really sick baby, 2 years of age, 8 years ago. 2 years of age, very troubled breathing, not responsive, everything's looking really terrible. And for sort of 90 minutes, felt like hours, we were trying to get a story. What happened? This child apparently fell from a playground in town and hit their head, and the day before they were okay, and then they just got bad overnight. And we're trying to figure out what's going on. And the laboratory upstairs, we had a receptionist receive this child. We had nurses helping, assisting, another doctor, and laboratory assistants upstairs. They were saying to me, the lab assistants were saying, look, this child looks like they've been in a car accident, multi-trauma, all these parameters and variables of this child's results coming back. I said, no, it doesn't sort of fit with the story, right? And so we kept on trying to get this baby stable, and finally, the helicopter arrived and took this child, 2 years of age. I can remember it because I was at the head of the bed when you're trying to deal with someone who's so unwell, and you could, looking into this child's eyes for 90 minutes. And they picked this child up and took them to Starship Hospital, and the child went into a CT scanner in Starship Hospital and died. Okay, 2 years of age, Māori child. And when we got the report back on the CT scan, it showed massive trauma across the baby. Fractured pelvis, lacerated liver, spleen, abdomen. The baby bled into the abdomen so much that they had no blood to go to the brain, so they had a hypoxic brain injury, it's called. Now, this child hadn't fallen off a playground. This child had been brutalised by their mother, and she was convicted of murder, I believe. To relive that a year later, go down and testify. But point is there, who can believe that this lady had problems with gambling that was creating social stress in the home, that was creating significant issues that created such a situation that she would brutalise the child? You guys need to think about that, because this is the level of impact that gambling, a pokie machine in Kaitai, is having on the life of a young child, right? Now, this is dramatic and extreme, but there's many other examples that aren't so extreme. But if this should only be one that we should say this is not, we shouldn't accept this, right? And because these people aren't born evil, wanting to kill children. We create environments that layers so much stress upon them, and gambling is a part of that. There is one of the concerning things I have in here. I'm going to call you out, sorry, Gareth, but the culture of care for Class 4 facilities or something. I'm like, actually, that concerns me that we're even thinking about how can we make them say, I've got a little sticker saying we are an accredited gambling facility, when we know what the harm that causes. I actually, my position on some of these facilities is that my position is they have no place in communities like mine, because they do take food out of the mouths of children, they do take warmth out of their homes, and they do create layers of stress on top of already stressed people. So 4 or 5 years ago, I approached the local mayors. So it is political. We've got a local council in New Zealand, we've got central government, local government. Those are the levers for us to be able to affect the change. But to be honest, we have weak leaders. You know, we have people that aren't prepared to say that, no, this is going to cause more harm than good. And I went to a mayoral candidates meeting for the Far North District Council at a time when, just in the previous calendar year, $13.1 million was taken out of that community. Okay, now this is a community of significant deprivation, high social and health needs, unemployment. We can ill afford to lose $13 million. 1.2 went back into the community. In my town, 730,000 in one quarter came out of our town. And you know, that is, you know, when I go and sit in a cafe, that downside is they make a good coffee, and I'm watching people stream through, principals, teachers, pastors, you know, but, you know, mums, kuia, you know, kaumatua, elders that are going in there and putting money they can ill afford into these machines. It's, you know, we have to create an environment that's healthy to give people the opportunities to make healthy decisions. And what we're doing at the moment is not doing that. Particular focus I have is around pokey machines, and you know, my position is that we should have something that stops the proliferation of these machines, number one. Number two is we need to control and regulate them more. So Richard and Gareth, okay, if I go to Sky City, there might be cameras that might monitor or there's patrols that might monitor if there are children in the cars. Would that happen? Okay, that doesn't happen in Kaitaia. I don't see anyone walking around the car parks of the 8 or 9 pokey outlets, and I would say that we're missing something there. If we're going to say we should be policing it here, why aren't we policing it elsewhere? And if we can't police it there, then why are we letting it happen elsewhere? And so, this is happening because, people are coming to me and saying, oh, we've seen these kids sitting outside the Waipapakoti Tavern, for about 3 or 4 hours. I had a story a few years ago when a local businessman came up to me. It was just before an election. He said, "Who are we going to vote for to address the issue of child poverty?" I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Well, look, on the weekend I came into my yard. I'm a mechanic. Come into his yard." And he said, "I saw these kids hovering around in the backyard, and they were just getting up to mischief. I thought they were getting up to mischief." And he got into his yard, and he gave them all a growling, and then they all turned around, and what he found was they were getting into his pig bucket, where the pig food was. That people put their scraps from the staff room, and they'd feed their pigs on the after work and stuff. And he asked them, "Why were you doing this?" And he said, "They were hungry." And I remember I was being interviewed on TV once, and there was someone, Petra Baggis, so shout out for her. Not so good though. She said to me, "Oh, Lance, this happens in Vietnam, and this happens in, I've seen child poverty." I said, "Yeah, but we're not in Vietnam. We're in Kaitaia, which is a beautiful part of the world, and we shouldn't be seeing this." And so, look, there's my point here today is that, I am seeing children impacted by the effects of, harmful gambling activities that we condone. Communities condone it, council condones it, government condones it. That is in our most needy communities, our communities of greatest need. So, look, this is not something that I am it's new. I'm very passionate about it. We do need political leadership to address this, and we need to, encourage, our country and our people to know that there's harm being affected by this form of activity, and that we have to do something about it. Because the big concern for us is, where are we going to head? The big concern is, I don't know, I'm thinking 20 years since pokies became widely distributed across New Zealand. Where are we going to be in 20 years' time is my great concern. So that's pokies. Where are we going to be in terms of online gambling, and where we're going to be in terms of sport, betting and all this. I mean, I actually have to say it's disgraceful to see an All Blacks game halftime talking about odds and rate and ratio. I love watching the All Blacks, very proud of it. But how do we, if we say that we shouldn't be allowing alcohol and tobacco to be advertised alongside, prominent sports or activities, what are we doing with gambling? Someone interviewed me this morning and said, people are always going to go back to do something. And I guess, the point is it's not going to address their sense of hopelessness and their sense of desperation. I know that. I know there's so much more work to do there, but we can't make an environment that contributes to further desperation and further hopelessness and creates lakes of debt and stress on these communities that are struggling they're drowning under it. And so, there's a whole lot of work to be done upstream. There's no doubt about that. But we can do this, and we can do it quickly. We need to have a stepwise approach where we can say, this is what we'll do today, and this is what we're going to do next month and next year, and let's just put a target to stop the harm that is caused by these problematic gambling behaviours. And Paul and I talked about it. It's rife with conflict too. The organisations that are benefiting from this have people that are in important public positions that are having really inappropriate influence. Going back to the mayoral candidates thing, I 3 or 4 years ago I went to a meeting. I said, of you 4 or 5 here, who of you supports a sinking lid policy for pokie machines in our community? I said to them exactly what I said to you today. These machines make my job harder, causes poverty-related disease to come into our hospitals. And all 4 or 5 of them said, oh, look, it's individual responsibility. It's, some of them even said to me, oh, the $1 million in the quarter that came out of Kaitaia, it's tourists coming into Paihia that, or travelling to Kawakawa or to Kaikoe and coming up into our little part of the country and putting all their money into it. It's like, that was an ex-mayor. And I was like, that's crazy. It was like, oh, but we fund things. The room you're in, Lance, is funded by this activity. And I said, how did New Zealand build itself before we had pokie machines and these, did we just not do it? The reality is we did. We did things, but we didn't it wasn't the harm associated with this. And the reality is the people that are putting the money into those machines aren't the ones that are going to the library in Kaitaia. They're not the ones that are enjoying and reaping the benefits of these facilities. And I actually made a pledge really that any activity we're involved in terms of fundraising would never go to these gaming trusts, because all we're doing is supporting their existence. So so it was an interesting mayoral candidate meeting, because they all said it was individual responsibility, and that also, like what I heard with Bruce Robinson this morning, it's from the gaming industry, I think it is, our hands are tied. We've just we've got to do what the legislators and the powers that be determine, and that's weak. The other thing is that one of the candidates, actually, it was John Carter, who's now the mayor. He said, philosophically, I'm opposed to gambling. Okay, so he's now the mayor of Far North. And I said to him, weren't you in your last term Minister of Racing? He was a government MP, Northern, longest serving, 20 years. He's now the Far North mayor. And he was the Minister of Racing, so philosophically opposed to gambling must have been. I said to him, it must have been really hard to be the Minister of Racing. There's a lack of leadership, and that's probably the most important thing. I'm here to say to you, and I think I've probably spoken long enough, I'm here to say that, my experience and lived experience and clinical experiences, and I guess a personal experience, is the harm associated with problem gambling. I think that probably includes a whole spectrum of problems, not just limited to what I've described today. And, we need to say that there's the presence of problematic gambling and facilities and activities in communities that have high health need, social need, is harming those communities. And in my case, we're talking about children who are in poverty. So I think I didn't, I wondered if there was some opportunity for questions, Paula, or...
And you need to make sure that I don't go over time either. So, questions from the floor?
I think why people tend to listen to you, babe, is because you've got the doctor initials attached. When it's just a Joe Blow, my initials, MRS, Mrs. It doesn't have the same clout.
And your question is, Ewa?
But my, no, okay, what?
Aye.
Because that's really important to say. My question is, have they upheld the sinking lid policy in the farm?
Yeah, I believe they have adopted it, but in terms of the other councils, I'm not sure about what regional councils have adopted or district councils have adopted it, but I believe we, the Far North, have. But my response to that, it's not far enough. It's only a start, and we shouldn't allow them to rest on the laurels and say that will, that's enough. We actually have to push them to go further. And stopping the proliferation is one start, but actually starting to remove and actually eliminating these problematic gambling facilities has to be our aspiration. And in terms of the DR, ka pai, good point. You use what you have to get your job done, right?
Are you aware of the different policies, as you said, about the policy in the Far North, that every council and district council, so what do they call them, the TLAs,
Yep.
all have different policies around
Yes.
gambling.
Yes.
And what I've personally noticed is that those TLAs that have really comprehensive policies, lower harm.
Yep.
Those ones, there's one actually in Marlborough, it's one page, high harm.
Yep.
So I suppose it's not quite a question, but I'd love you to add that to your kōrero around this,
Yep.
to encourage councils to really put in comprehensive sinking lid policies that are well managed and well policed, and that they don't
Yep.
do it every 3
Kia
years.
ora.
So
two questions after you've answered.
yeah, I guess the point there is if you leave it to individual councils, you'll get a variation of practice. So that's why you have to have central leadership. That's why central government has to set the tone and the platform for how healthy communities are going to exist through, say, in this particular case, gambling.
That's right. So two questions, Richard, and one at the back afterwards.
Yeah, one of the issues seems to be that even if your council does its best with the sinking lid, it can't do anything about those that were established by 2003 when the Act was passed. They're stuck with them forever under the current law.
Right.
Do we need a law change that said somebody, probably a council, could actually phase them out totally in those areas where there is particular vulnerability? Is that the law change that we need?
Yep. I mean, that's, I think everyone, I mean, that's what we're saying is that, like the regulators can't do this. It needs to be legislative change. Yep.
Yep. And at the back, please.
I come from Tokoroa in South Auckland, and to the regulators, we're going to have a building with 30 poking machines in because the council failed to consult with the broader community, listen to one small portion, the 3 clubs that joined together, 2 of which were running broke. And I'm still waiting to allow our community to be heard. And the council said, well, we've given them a piece of paper, they can do they've got the building consent. But I believe that the DIA have failed to check whether the council did their job properly and consulting the community. It's not a fair fight when you're a community person. They've got the lawyers and everybody stacked up. And it needs, the regulation needs to be given back further up. Because for small communities, we don't
kia ora for your comment. We have to close questions there, I'm afraid, but Gareth is here now, so he may be able to have a chat with you at break. I think that would be really good if we could do that. So, Lance, on behalf of everybody here, I'd like to give you this is a not-for-profit organisation-run conference, so we don't have fancy wrapping paper, but here's a gift and a card to say thank you so much, and really appreciate you sharing your story.